Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today we will be discussing SCR's rather horrific optimization and how it can be fixed. Imagine this. You've just had a long day at school or work or whatever. You come home and you boot up your favourite Roblox game. You spawn a train at Hampton Hargate and you get several screen freezes. Alright, that doesn't really matter. You're driving now, and then as you leave the tunnels towards Morganstown, you get more screen freezes because the game is loading the Whitney Green area. You get your train down to Berrily, and whoa, another screen freeze. You finally get past St. Helens Bridge, and now you can barely move your camera, as the game tries rendering the entirety of Stepford City at once. Ultimately, a tiny interruption in your connection sees you disconnect just before departing from Stepford East. Alright, we'll try again later. You're sitting on the bus, and you open up SCR, just to do one quick route. You make the horrible mistake of spawning at Hampton Hargate again, and wow, it's not loading. You just spent 10 minutes on a loading screen only to get barely working textures. What's going on? Well, you, my friend, are experiencing SCR's optimization problems. I'll start off by stating the obvious. About half of SCR's optimization problems aren't the fault of the SCR dev team. They are the fault of Roblox. The Roblox Studio game engine primarily sacrifices optimization for the sake of simplicity, and it can really affect larger projects like Stepford County Railway and British Railway. The Roblox engine is the backbone that SCR runs on, and ultimately it has a lot of flaws. SCR relies heavily on the ease of access that Roblox provides for players. However, the lack of actual power and control that consumer engines like Unity and Unreal Engine offer is its main downturn. Part counts, graphical rendering, lack of ability to implement proper occlusion, no LODs and so on are all symptoms of the Roblox engine's core. Roblox is not properly optimized at its core, and this is something SCR can't fix. Despite the flawed core, there's still a lot of issues that the SCR dev team can fix if they get their act together. A house built entirely on poor foundations will eventually collapse, but that doesn't mean you can't delay the collapse by building the house to a proper standard. This was demonstrated in an excellent way by British Railway, which, although more detailed and graphically demanding, manages to keep the game optimized. At least that was the case until I tried the Pencan extension on mobile. It doesn't lag, but you could cook an egg on my phone. Granted, SCR is 3 times older, but BR shows that proper optimization is indeed possible. Or at least it did show that before version 1.4 and most subsequent updates. They did it through a clever trick by effectively downscaling the game to row scale in early development before 1.0 released. SCR can't do that right now because it's already a complete game. I'll try not to nerd out too much in this segment, and I'll try to simplify the problem a bit. The majority of SCR's optimization problems are from too much memory consumption, CPU delay, and network throughput, especially on mobile. These values skyrocket through the roof and are consistently several times over their target. Meanwhile, the GPU is relatively underutilized in this regard. BR has this fairly well balanced, in the sense that both are violently overheating at the same time. Some of you can already see the solution here, moving more of the load from the CPU and RAM memory to the GPU and its dedicated VRAM memory. While this won't solve the mobile memory problem, as the VRAM and RAM on phones are integrated, it's still going to improve performance on the CPU delay side, and on PC in general. That's great and all, but how do we do this? It's simple. Mesh, mesh, mesh. Roblox has a natural weakness to part counts, where the higher the part count is, the higher the CPU load is. Part of how we can reduce this load is by turning everything, yes Toby, that includes the rails, into mesh models. A mesh will naturally stress out the GPU more, but the CPU will benefit from a heavily reduced part count. It looks like they're trying to mesh the rails in version 2.4, as we haven't seen any rails in the sneak peeks yet, and this is a good sign. Also, remember how I said earlier that SCR can't implement LODs? Yeah, well, I lied. While SCR can't implement standard LODs like we see in most AAA titles, they can still implement something I like to call a performance mode. Basically, this quote-unquote performance mode will reduce several settings like render distance, graphics detail, some animations, client-side rendering of certain irrelevant objects like, I don't know, trash bins, for the sake of faster load times and less load. It could even have 2 to 3 levels where you can adjust between graphical fidelity and pure performance. There's a lot of stuff the dev team would be able to do with these options if they just fiddled with it for a bit. Another thing that all games implement to solve performance issues, although I'm not 100% sure it could work on Roblox, is something called ambient occlusion. Basically, ambient occlusion makes it so the client only renders and processes what the player can see. Everything else, everything behind or to the side of the player's view, is hidden, so as to not drag down performance. Also, using raycasting, not ray tracing, raycasting, we can tell what the player can and can't see, and for example, hide a bunch of houses that are behind a hill, even though the player is looking at the hill. It's a really neat optimization tactic. Oh no, I've used it for some of my games. Also, aside from disabling the rendering, you can also disable most physics simulations. For example, in this train game I'm working on with Samsung Squid, we're right now trying to figure out a system where, if the player is in first person, the bogies won't be simulated at all, and instead the train will just follow a set rail. It's yet another really neat system that just helps to reduce load while not affecting the player experience at all. And then there's the third thing. It's called combing through the code. Every game should do this once in a while. Since languages, and yes that includes Luau and their compilers, and the programmers programming them are constantly evolving, old code should be constantly evaluated for ways to better optimize it. Perhaps a more efficient search algorithm can be implemented somewhere where it was previously blocked due to some random constraint. Perhaps a more efficient parsing method can be used in one line instead of the other. And so on, and so on, and so on. Perhaps the language introduces a new data type that is faster than some of the older data types. Programming languages, and especially their compilers, or in Luau's case, interpreters, constantly evolve. And that is another thing on Roblox's end. Dear Roblox, please add support for some sort of compiler language. C, C++, C#, Java, Rust, Go, I don't know, just add something. Luau is way faster than both Lua and Python, but it's still being held back because it has to constantly interpret code, rather than outputting it into something like a bin file, and then letting the computer run the hyper-efficient machine code directly from said bin file. There's a reason why operating systems and AAA games aren't made in Python or Lua. These languages require an interpreter to constantly go over and interpret code. Compiling takes a bit more longer time during production, and it's a bit more complicated, but it helps in performance when the game is running. You don't have to replace Luau. After all, it is simpler than compiled languages. But please, all you need to do is add support for compiled games, and then allow the developers to choose when they start a project. They can either code in some language that compiles to a bin file, or they can code in the easy and familiar Luau at a slight cost to performance for larger games. This isn't a platform-wide issue. These optimization problems mostly happen when developers push the limits too far in certain games like SCR or BR. However, we should allow them to push the limits as far as possible. If we don't let games like this push the limits and expand, what's to stop them just leaving Roblox altogether for a different platform like Steam or Google Play? It might sound ridiculous, but once one game leaves for these platforms and demonstrates that it can retain its player base, the rest of Roblox's more complicated games will likely follow suit, and Roblox will just be a mess of random games like Steel or Brainrot. Thank you very much for listening to this completely unjustified rant. Special thanks to my channel members whose names you can see on screen. Join the Discord via the link in the description. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you all next video. Goodbye.